Everybody in Coldwater County had already made their peace with the worst. 4 years is a long time to keep a candle lit for two little girls, long enough that the flyers on the gas station wall go soft and yellow, long enough that people stop saying their names at the diner because saying them out loud feels like picking a scab off the whole town at once. Emmeline and Ruthie Cardwell were gone, and gone had quietly become dead in everybody's mind. Everybody except the mother who wouldn't let it, and one stubborn old mare who couldn't understand why the girl who used to braid her mane had simply stopped coming. I'm the man that mare belonged to. I didn't ask for her, and I sure didn't ask for what she'd end up dragging me into. What I'm about to tell you isn't a story about a hero. It's about a horse that refused to be reasonable, an old fool who followed her up a mountain he had no business climbing, and two children who survived something no child should have to survive. Stay with me, because before you learn how they came home, you have to understand why nobody thought they ever could. The first thing I heard that morning wasn't a scream, it was wood. That splintering, groaning crack a fence rail makes when something big has decided it no longer respects the arrangement. I was at the kitchen sink with a cup of coffee gone cold in my hand, and even before I set it down I knew which animal it was. You learn the sound your troubles make. Birdie made a very particular kind of trouble. I got my boots on the wrong feet near enough, and went out into a dark that was thinking about being dawn but hadn't committed. April up here does that. It teases you with a warm afternoon and then reminds you at 4 a.m. that winter keeps a spare key. My breath hung in front of me. The yard light buzzed. And down at the west fence, in the blue almost nothing before sunrise, that old buckskin mare had put her chest against the top rail and simply pushed until it gave. "Birdie," I said it low, the way you'd say it to a person about to do something they'd regret. "Birdie, quit." She didn't quit. That was the whole problem with her, always had been. She turned her head and looked at me, one dark eye catching the yard light, and there was nothing wild in it. That's what I want you to understand. A crazed horse, a spooked horse, you can read that in a heartbeat and you handle it. This wasn't that. This was an animal that had made up her mind about something and found me irrelevant to it. She stepped clean over the busted rail, put her nose to the wind coming down off the high country and pulled toward it, toward the mountains, west and up, the way she always went when she went. I want to tell you I ran and got a halter. What I actually did was stand there in my crooked boots and say a word my late wife wouldn't have cared for, because I was 63 years old and tired in the particular way you get tired when you live alone. And the last thing I wanted at that hour was to chase 1,100 pounds of opinion across half a county. Let me back up. You're going to need some of this to make sense of the rest. I ran a small outfit off the Ghost Creek Road, cattle mostly. Some horses I broke and sold when my knees still allowed it. My wife Marion passed 3 winters back. Cancer, the quiet kind that doesn't announce itself till it's already unpacked and put its feet up. After she was gone, the place got too big and too quiet at the same time, which I didn't think was possible, and I did what men like me do, which is find more chores. I keep a ledger, always have. Little green stockman's book in my shirt pocket, and I write things in it: a heifer's due date, a fence post that needs replacing, the price of hay. After Marion, I started writing other things in it too. Small things: Robin's back, frost on the truck. Called Dell about the well pump, he didn't call back. I don't know who I was writing them for. Her, maybe. It's a habit I'm not proud of and can't seem to quit, like chewing the inside of my cheek, which I also do, and which I was doing right then, watching that mare walk off toward the sunrise with her tail up like she owned the morning. Birdie hadn't always been mine. That's the thread you'll want to hold. 4 years back, and I have to reach for this next part the way you reach into cold water. There were 2 girls in this county named Emmeline and Ruth Cardwell. Emmy and Ruthie. Emmy was 11 that spring. Ruthie was 7. Their people had a little place east of town, and their daddy Dale kept a couple horses. And the older girl, Emmy, she had this buckskin mare she'd named Birdie, because when she was small she thought the horse's whinny sounded like a bird. Kids name things for reasons that make sense only to them. I'd see the two of them, girl and mare, at the little playday rodeos they run for the 4-H. Emmy no bigger than a fence post, and Birdie following her around a warm-up pen like a dog. That girl could get on that horse bareback with a hank of baling twine, and they'd move like one animal with two minds. Then one morning in the fall, the Cardwell girls didn't come out to the school bus. I'll tell it the way the county came to know it, because I wasn't there for the start of it, none of us were. Dale Cardwell and his wife Nora had been coming apart for a while. Everybody knew, the way everybody in a small place knows the shape of a thing without knowing the middle of it. Money, drink, a job at the mill that dried up, a temper. There'd been a night the sheriff got called. There was talk of Nora taking the girls to her sister's over in the next valley. And on a Tuesday in October, before any of that could get sorted by a judge, Dale put his two daughters in his truck before light and drove off, and nobody in Coldwater County saw any of the three of them again. For a while it was a manhunt. Roadblocks, dogs, the state boys, a helicopter that thumped over my place for 3 days running and spooked my cows into the far corner of the section. They found his truck the next spring, way up an old logging spur off the saddleback, sunk to the axles and stripped by weather. No people. The theory hardened over the seasons the way theories do. Dale had taken the girls up into the back country, into that broke country north of Ghost Creek where the maps just say National Forest and mean good luck, and something had gone wrong. An accident. The cold. Worse. There are 100 ways to die in those mountains, and only a few of them leave anything to find. The dogs quit, the helicopter quit, the state boys wrote their report, and one by one, so gentle you couldn't say exactly when it happened, the whole county quit too. Not Nora, but everybody else. Here's the part I did have a hand in. When the Cardwell place got sold off to pay what Dale had left owing, banks don't grieve, there was a dispersal sale. Household goods on hay wagons, tools, and a handful of livestock, including one aging buckskin mare nobody wanted because she wouldn't settle and kept trying to jump out of the sale pen. I'd known the family a little, and I stood there at that sad little auction with the auctioneer's voice rattling off numbers into a half-empty lot, and I watched that mare pace the rail and call this high, cracked, searching call. And I could not for the life of me walk away and leave her to the killer buyer who was the only other bidder. So I paid too much for a horse I didn't need and hauled her home, and I told myself it was because she was sound stock and I'd sell her on in the spring. I never sold her on. Some things you take home meaning it to be temporary, and 4 years later they're still eating your hay. The problem was Birdie never accepted her new arrangement. Not once. She'd stand at my west fence, the fence that looks up toward the saddleback and the Ghost Creek drainage, and she'd stare up at that country for hours. And every so often, a few times a year, she'd get out, not to run to the neighbors' mares, not to the good grass. She'd bust the west fence and head straight up, always toward the mountains, and I'd have to saddle a younger horse and go fetch her back down off the first ridge where the trail gets too rough even for her stubbornness. The vet said it was habit. My neighbor Dell said she was just a fence jumper and I should sell her before she taught the others. I wrote in my ledger more than once, Birdie out again. West. And I'll be honest with you, I thought she was grieving that girl. I thought she was an old animal who'd lost her person and kept walking toward the last direction she'd known her, and that there was a kind of dumb loyalty in it that I understood too well to punish her for. Because wasn't I doing the same thing with a green notebook and a dead woman's name? That's what I thought, a grieving horse, a closed case, a sad story the county had folded up and put away. I did not think, no sane man would have thought, that 4 years on, there was anything up that mountain still worth walking toward. So, back to that cold April morning, with the fence rail busted, and my boots on wrong and Birdie already 40 yards up the slope, moving with a purpose that put a strange cold finger on the back of my neck. Something was different this time. I couldn't have told you what. She wasn't packing the fence and calling like the other times. She wasn't testing me. She was leaving, deliberate as a woman walking out a door she's done with, and when I finally got a young gelding named Pete saddled and went after her, she didn't slow to let me catch her the way she always had before. She kept her nose to the wind and climbed. I should have turned back at the second cattle guard. My knees were already talking. The clouds up top had that flat gray look that means weather's deciding something. And I had 100 reasons cattle to check. A well pump limping along, my own good sense, to rope that fool horse and drag her home. But I want to tell you about the wind. There was a wind coming down off the high country that morning, the way there is most mornings, cold air sliding downhill off the snowfields. And Bertie kept lifting her head into it and flaring her nostrils and letting out that call, that same high, cracked, searching call I'd heard her make in the sail pen 4 years before. I'd never once heard her make it out on the range. Only in the pen, that day, looking for something that wasn't there. She was making it now, up the wind toward the mountains, over and over. And God help me, I got a feeling. Not a thought, I want to be precise, because I've turned this over 1,000 times since, not a thought, because a thought would have had reasons and I had none. Just a feeling, cold and certain and stupid, that the mare knew something I didn't, and that if I roped her and hauled her home I would spend the rest of my short life wondering. I chewed the inside of my cheek till it bled a little. Then I let her lead. We climbed all morning. The trail, if you can call it that, followed Ghost Creek up through the timber, then quit being a trail at all somewhere above the old burn, where the fire came through the year Marion, and I married. Deadfall everywhere. Gray trunks stacked like a giant had lost a game of pickup sticks. Pete picked his way through it, blowing hard, and I let Bertie stay out front, and every time I thought this is far enough. This is madness. I'm an old widower going to die of exposure chasing a horse's bad habit. Every time, she'd top a rise ahead of me and stand there, black against the sky, waiting until I came up. Then she'd go again. I'll tell you a thing about that climb that I've never told anybody. Somewhere in the middle of it, breathing hard, sweating cold through my coat, I started talking to Marion, out loud, asking her what in the world I was doing. And it seemed to me I'm not a superstitious man, understand. I fix pumps and worm calves and I believe in what I can put my hands on. It seemed to me the mountain didn't answer, but it didn't tell me to go home either. So I didn't. By early afternoon we came up out of the burn into a country I'd never set foot in, and I've lived under these mountains my whole life. A high-hanging valley, folded back on itself so you couldn't see it from below, tucked between two shoulders of granite like something the range was trying to keep. There was old-growth timber down in it, dark and close, and a creek, and the kind of stillness that isn't peace. It's the stillness of a place that isn't used to being looked at. Bertie stopped at the lip of it. She stood dead still, ears hard forward, and every muscle in her went tight as a held breath. And then she lowered her head and made that call again, but soft this time, so soft, like a thing you'd say into a room where somebody's sleeping. I sat Pete and I looked down into that hidden valley, and the wind shifted, and it carried up to me two things. The first was the smell of wood smoke, not old, not a lightning fire, the particular blue thread of a small, tended human fire. And the second, faint, thin, and so impossible that my whole body went to ice around it. The second was the sound of a child's voice. I couldn't make out words, just the pitch of it. High and young and alive, drifting up out of a valley where 3 people had gone to die 4 years ago, and where the whole county had long since agreed there was nothing left to find. Bertie took 1 step down toward it. Then she turned and looked back at me, that one dark eye, the way she'd looked at me at the fence before dawn. And I understood, finally, 4 years too late, exactly what she'd been trying to tell me the whole time. I don't remember getting down off Pete. I remember being on the ground. I remember my hand shaking on the saddle horn and my heart going like a fence stapler, and the single clear thought pushing up through all the noise. Don't run down there. Whatever was down in that valley had survived 4 years by nobody running down into it. If I came crashing through the timber hollering, I might undo the very thing I'd come to do. So I tied Pete to a deadfall, and I left Birdie loose because there was no holding her anyway. And I went down into that hidden valley slow, on foot, with my hands where they could be seen, the way you approach any animal that's had good reason to be afraid. The cabin was small and hard to see even close-up gray logs, a sod roof gone to grass, built into the slope so the mountain hid it. Somebody had chosen this place to not be found. There was a garden plot, a poor thin thing but tended, with the year's first green just showing. There was a rack of split wood. There was a line strung between two pines with clothes on it, small clothes, and the sight of those small clothes moving in the wind is a thing I will carry to my own grave. And there was a girl. She came around the corner of the cabin with an armload of kindling, and she saw me and she dropped it. And for one terrible second we just stood and looked at each other across 40 feet of mountain grass. She was tall and thin, all elbows and wariness, maybe 15, with hair chopped short, and uneven the way you'd cut it yourself with a hunting knife because there was no one else to do it. Her clothes were patched with other clothes. Her boots were too small. Her ankles showed. And her face, I have looked at a lot of faces in a long life, and I have never seen one hold so much at once. Fear, fury, and underneath, buried so deep she may not have known it was there, a wild flare of hope she immediately hated herself for feeling. I knew her, 4 years older, half feral, but I knew her. Emmy Cardwell had Birdie's whole life braided into her small hands once, at a Playday rodeo, and here she was. "Emmy," I said, my voice came out cracked. "Emmeline, it's all right, I know your mama." That was the wrong thing and the right thing at once. Her face broke and reformed. She stepped backward, one hand going behind her, and when it came forward it had a knife in it, a good knife, a working knife, held not like a child playing but like a person who has skinned animals to eat. Her arm was steady. Her eyes were not. "You go back the way you came," she said. Her voice was rusty, like a hinge that hasn't turned in a while, like a person who hasn't had much cause to talk. "You didn't see anything. There's nothing here." I did not move. I want you to know that in that moment I made the hardest calculation of my life, and I made it in about 2 seconds, and it was this: I could rush her. I was old, but I was big, and she was starved thin, and I could have that knife and have her subdued and be hauling her down the mountain to safety inside the hour. It would be for her own good. And I knew, the way you know true things, that if I did it, if I laid one hand on that child by force, I would break something in her that 4 years of surviving hadn't managed to break. She had held herself together by being the one who decided things. Take that from her and you'd be taking the last of her. So I did the hardest thing, which was nothing. I sat down. Right there in the wet grass, an old man, hands open on my knees, putting myself below her. "I'm not going to touch you," I said. "I'm not going to make you do anything. I'm just going to sit here a minute because I'm old and I climbed a mountain, and I'm going to tell you something true, and then it's yours to decide. All right." She didn't answer, the knife didn't drop, but she didn't run. "That buckskin mare up on the ridge," I said. "That's Birdie." I watched the name land on her like a physical thing. Her whole body flinched around it. "She's been trying to get up here for 4 years," I said. "I bought her at your daddy's sale because I couldn't stand to see her go to the wrong man, and I've been feeding her ever since. And every few months she busts my fence and heads up this mountain, and I always thought she was just a grieving old horse. I thought she'd lost her girl. Turns out she just knew where you were, and none of us would listen. She brought me here. I didn't find you, Emmy. She did." And that's when the cabin door opened, and a smaller child came out, and everything I thought I could hold together came apart. Ruthie, 7 when she vanished. 11 now, though she was small for it, small the way a plant grown in a dark room is small. She had a doll made of a sock and some yarn, and she stood in the doorway with her thumb near her mouth, staring at me with none of her sister's fear, because she'd been kept from the world too young to have learned to fear it the way Emmy had. And when Emmy heard the door she moved, quick, no thought in it. She put herself between the little one and me, knife still up, her back to her sister, her whole starved body become a wall. 4 years of what that gesture meant, all in one motion. I understood then who had kept these children alive and how, and at what cost. "Emmy," I said, very quiet, "where's your daddy?" The knife lowered an inch. Just an inch. And Emmy Cardwell, 15 years old, looked at me across that mountain grass and said the thing that I think she'd been carrying up here alone all winter with no one to say it to. "Under the rocks," she said, "by the creek since the snow." Dale Cardwell had died over the winter. I got the rest of it in pieces that day and after, some from Emmy and more from Ruthie once the little one decided I was safe, which she did before her sister could. A fever or something in his chest, no way to know, no doctor within a 4-year climb of that place. He'd gone down in February with the drifts to the eaves, and he'd lingered a week, and then he'd died in the one bed, and Emmy, 15, had done what had to be done. She'd kept Ruthie fed. She'd kept the fire going. When the ground was too frozen to dig, she'd covered her father's body with stones from the creek so the animals couldn't get at it, and she'd waited out the rest of the winter alone with a little sister and a corpse and the promise her father had made her make. That was the thing that undid me later when I could bear to hear it. Dale, and I'll not defend the man, understand. He stole 4 years of these girls' lives and their mother's heart out of nothing but his own broken pride. Dale, dying, had made Emmy promise she'd wait till spring and then walk down and find the way home. He'd told her the direction. He'd told her their mother was down there and had never stopped looking. Whatever he'd been at the start, at the end he tried to give them back. Emmy had been getting ready to try to walk out. She'd been rationing the last of the stores for a journey she wasn't sure 2 children could survive. She'd been standing at the edge of the only life she could remember, terrified. And the horse got there first. We didn't go down the mountain that day. It was too late and the girls were too weak, and Ruthie couldn't have made the burn on those legs. I stayed. I built the fire up and I gave them what was in my saddlebags, not much. Jerky and a chocolate bar gone soft and a can of peaches I keep for God knows what. And I watched 2 children eat that plain food like it was a feast at the end of the world. And I stepped outside so they wouldn't see an old man's face come apart. Birdie had come down into the valley by then. She stood at the edge of the timber, not coming close, just watching the cabin. And after a while the door opened and Emmy came out, still holding the knife but holding it loose now, forgotten, and she walked across the grass to that old buckskin mare in the last of the light. I won't tell you everything about that. Some things aren't mine to give away. But I'll tell you that Emmy Cardwell put her forehead against Birdie's neck, the way she must have done 10,000 times as a small girl before the whole world went wrong, and that the mare stood dead still and let her, and that neither of them made a sound. And I'll tell you that I, a grown man of 63 who fixes pumps and worms calves and does not go in for foolishness, had to turn around and look very hard at the mountains for a while. I wrote in my ledger that night by firelight with 2 children asleep for the first time in years, knowing a grown-up they hadn't lost was in the room. I couldn't manage much. My hand wouldn't work right. I just wrote, "Found them. Birdie found them, both alive. Lord forgive us all." The way down took most of the next day. Ruthie riding Pete and Emmy walking beside Birdie because she wouldn't be parted from her, and me leading, choosing the gentlest way through the burn. We came out onto the Ghost Creek Road near dark, and I flagged down Dell's boy in his truck, and I'll spare you the noise of what came after. The sheriff, the ambulances that couldn't get up the road so met us on it, the flashing lights, the phone calls rolling out across the county like a stone dropped in still water. I'll give you only one more thing, because it's the thing that matters and the rest is just events. They brought Nora Cardwell to the hospital in town before we even got there. For years she kept a candle lit that everybody else had let go dark. 4 years of a town gently, kindly, unbearably telling her to accept it. And I was in the hallway, useless, an old man in filthy clothes who didn't belong in that bright, clean place, when they walked her in. She came around the corner and she saw her daughters, thin, wild, alive, and she made a sound I have no word for. Not a scream. Older than a scream. and Ruthie, who had been 7, who barely remembered, hung back shy behind her sister. But Emmy, who had held the knife, who had covered her father with stones, who had got them through the winter and been about to walk them out of the mountains alone on nothing but a dying man's directions and a promise. Emmy let go of everything she'd been carrying for 4 years all at once, and she went to her mother the way a person goes into deep water, and the two of them folded down onto that hospital floor together and did not get up for a long time. I stood in the hallway and I chewed the inside of my cheek and I let them have it. It wasn't mine. That was a year ago now. They tell me the girls are doing as well as anyone could ask, which is to say some days are good and some days the mountain comes back into their eyes and you have to just be quiet and let it pass. Emmy's grown some. She'll talk to me now, on the days she comes out to the ranch, which is most days because, and here's the part I didn't expect, the part I turn over in my ledger some nights when I can't sleep. Bertie's back home at my place. Nora couldn't take a horse, not with everything else. So the mare stayed with me and Emmy comes to see her, and the two of them go up onto the lower ridge together, the girl and the buckskin, just to the edge of where the country breaks and no farther, and they stand there a while looking up at the saddleback and the hidden valley you can't see from below. I don't know what they say to each other up there. I've never asked. Some things you take home meaning them to be temporary, and years later they're still eating your hay, and you find out too late they were never yours to sell. They were only ever on their way back to somebody. I asked Emmy once near the end of last summer how she thought Bertie knew. All those years, all that country, how a horse could know. She looked at me a long while with those eyes that have seen more winter than any child should.